What if I told you that the most groundbreaking discovery in Harvard's 400-year history wasn't made by a tenured professor, a brilliant graduate student, or even someone with a high school diploma? What if I told you it was made by a 12-year-old girl who had been sleeping in subway tunnels, who hadn't seen the inside of a classroom in 3 years, and who made her discovery not with sophisticated equipment or cutting-edge technology, but with her fingertip on a rain-soaked window? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how one moment of pure curiosity shattered everything Harvard thought they knew about human potential. It's about a discovery so profound that it forced an entire institution to question not just their research, but their very understanding of where genius comes from. The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight when Dr. Elena Martinez finally decided to leave her office in Harvard's Cognitive Science building. It was past midnight on a Tuesday in October, and the campus had long since emptied of students and faculty. She'd been wrestling with the same problem for months now, staring at data that refused to make sense. Numbers that seemed to mock everything she thought she understood about pattern recognition and human perception. The elevator creaked as it descended to the ground floor, its ancient mechanisms protesting the late hour. Dr. Martinez rubbed her tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and gathered her raincoat closer. At 42, she had dedicated her life to understanding how the human brain processes visual information, how it finds patterns in chaos, how it makes sense of the seemingly random. Her research had implications for everything from artificial intelligence to treating autism. But tonight, like so many nights before, she felt like she was chasing shadows. The lobby of the Cognitive Science building was dimly lit, emergency lighting casting long shadows across polished floors. As she approached the main entrance, Dr. Martinez noticed something that made her pause. There, pressed against the large glass window that faced the courtyard, was a small figure. At first glance, it looked like someone had left a backpack against the glass. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized it was a person, a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 12 years old. She sat with her back against the building, legs pulled up to her chest, dark hair matted and wet from the rain. Her clothes were layers of mismatched items, clearly too large for her small frame, the kind of outfit assembled from donation bins and charity shops. A worn canvas bag sat beside her, everything she owned compressed into something she could carry. Dr. Martinez's first instinct was to call security. Harvard had protocols for situations like this, but something stopped her. The girl wasn't trying to break in or cause trouble. She was simply sitting there, completely still, staring up at something. Following her gaze, Dr. Martinez looked up at the large glass panel above the entrance, the one that served as both window and architectural statement. That's when she saw it, traced across the glass in what looked like condensation from breath. And rain were lines. Not random marks or childish scribbles, but deliberate, purposeful patterns. Even from inside the building, Dr. Martinez could see that these weren't ordinary drawings. There was something systematic about them, something that made her scientist's mind take notice. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, soaking through her coat in seconds. The girl looked up, startled, her eyes wide with fear. They were deep brown eyes, intelligent but wary, the kind that had learned to read danger in adult faces. "I'm sorry," the girl said quickly, starting to gather her bag. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'll move." "Wait," Dr. Martinez said, raising her hand gently. "You don't have to go anywhere. I'm Elena. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, clearly debating whether to trust this stranger. "Maya," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Maya, that's a beautiful name." Dr. Martinez looked up at the glass where the pattern still clung to the surface despite the rain. "Did you draw these?" Maya's eyes followed, her gaze upward, and for the first time something other than fear crossed her face. It was pride, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. It was something to do. The rain made the glass foggy, and I could see patterns in it. Dr. Martinez stepped closer to the glass, craning her neck to get a better view. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The patterns weren't random at all. They were complex geometric relationships, interconnected shapes that seemed to flow into each other with mathematical precision. There were spirals that connected to angular forms, curves that seemed to predict the next line before it appeared. It was like looking at a visual language she almost but not quite understood. "Maya, how did you know to draw these shapes this way?" The girl shrugged, a gesture that seemed too old for her young shoulders. "They just made sense. Like when you look at clouds and see shapes, except these shapes were already there. I just traced what I could see." Dr. Martinez felt something electric run down her spine. She had spent years studying pattern recognition, the way human brains could find order in chaos, meaning in randomness. She had published papers on visual processing, spoken at conferences around the world, earned tenure at one of the most prestigious universities on Earth. But she had never seen anything like what was etched on the glass above her head. "Maya, where did you learn to see patterns like this?" "I didn't learn it anywhere," Maya said, confusion evident in her voice. "I just see them. They're everywhere if you know how to look, in the way rain hits windows, in the cracks in sidewalks, in the way people walk when they think no one's watching." The rain continued to fall, and Dr. Martinez realized she was getting soaked. But she couldn't bring herself to move. She was looking at something unprecedented, something that challenged everything she thought she knew about human perception and pattern recognition. This 12-year-old girl, sitting homeless in the rain, had spontaneously created visual patterns that seemed to encode information in ways Dr. Martinez had only theorized about. "Maya, are you out here alone?" The girl's defensive walls went back up immediately. "I'm fine. I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "But it's cold and it's raining, and you're welcome to come inside where it's warm. I have an office upstairs where you can dry off." Maya studied her face for a long moment, those intelligent eyes searching for deception or hidden agendas. "You're not going to call the police or social services or anything?" Dr. Martinez considered her answer carefully. "I'm not going to call anyone tonight. Right now, I'm just a scientist who's very curious about what you've drawn on this glass. And I'm hoping you might be willing to tell me more about how you see these patterns." Something in her tone must have convinced Maya, because after another moment of hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, but if you try anything weird, I'm gone." "That's fair," Dr. Martinez said, leading the way back to the entrance. As they walked toward the building, she couldn't stop glancing back at the glass, at the patterns that seemed to shift and change in the moving light of the rain. The elevator ride to the 7th floor was quiet, but Dr. Martinez could feel Maya observing everything. The girl's eyes took in the building directory, the security cameras, the emergency exits. She was mapping her environment, planning escape routes. It was heartbreaking and impressive at the same time. Dr. Martinez's office was exactly what you'd expect from a cognitive science professor. Walls lined with books, whiteboards covered in diagrams and equations, a desk buried under research, papers and academic journals. But Maya's attention was immediately drawn to something else entirely. "What are those?" she asked, pointing to a series of large prints hanging on one wall. "Those are brain scans," Dr. Martinez explained, following Maya's gaze. They show how different parts of the brain light up when people are processing visual information. See these areas here? She pointed to bright spots on the scans. These regions become active when someone is recognizing patterns or making sense of complex visual data. Maya studied the images with an intensity that surprised Dr. Martinez. Most people's eyes glazed over when she started talking about neuroscience, but Maya seemed genuinely fascinated. So you can actually see thinking happening? In a way, yes. These scans show us which parts of the brain are working hardest when someone is solving a problem or processing information. Maya was quiet for a moment, still studying the brain scans. Do all people's brains light up the same way? That's a great question. No, they don't. Everyone's brain is different, and we all process information in slightly different ways. Some people are better at seeing patterns, others are better at remembering details, others are better at understanding emotions. What about people who see patterns that aren't supposed to be there? The question hit Dr. Martinez like a lightning bolt. It was exactly the kind of question that got to the heart of her research, the kind of question that could launch 1,000 studies. What do you mean by patterns that aren't supposed to be there? Maya seemed to struggle with how to explain something that was clearly complex in her mind. Like, you know how sometimes people say someone is crazy because they see things that other people don't see? But what if they're not crazy? What if they're just seeing patterns that are really there, but most people's brains aren't good enough to notice them? Dr. Martinez sat down heavily in her desk chair. This child, this homeless 12-year-old girl, had just articulated one of the most sophisticated questions in cognitive science. It was a question that researchers had been grappling with for decades. The difference between pattern recognition and pareidolia, between genuine insight and imagination, between seeing what's there and seeing what we want to be there. Maya, that's exactly what I study. That's what I've been trying to understand for my entire career. Really? Maya's eyes lit up with genuine interest. And what have you figured out? Dr. Martinez laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that carried years of frustration and dead ends. Honestly, not much. I have theories, I have data, I have computer models, but I'm missing something fundamental, something that would help me understand how the brain actually processes complex patterns. Maya nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. Maybe you're thinking about it wrong. What do you mean? Well, you're trying to understand how brains work by looking at pictures of brains thinking. But that's like trying to understand music by looking at pictures of instruments. You can learn some things, but you're missing the actual music. Dr. Martinez stared at this child, who had just, with one simple analogy, identified a core limitation in her research methodology. So, what would you suggest? Instead of looking at brains thinking, maybe you should look at what the thinking creates. Like if someone sees a pattern, don't just measure their brain. Look at the pattern they saw and figure out if it's really there. The simplicity and elegance of the suggestion was staggering. Dr. Martinez had been so focused on the neurological mechanisms of pattern recognition that she had lost sight of the patterns themselves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had been studying the instrument instead of listening to the music. Maya, can I ask you something? You said you see patterns everywhere. Can you show me what you mean? Maya glanced around the office, her eyes scanning the cluttered surfaces and dense wall decorations. After a moment, she pointed to a bookshelf where Dr. Martinez had stacked journals and papers in what appeared to be random piles. Those books, Maya said. They're not random. You've organized them by how often you use them, but not just that. The ones you reach for when you're frustrated are on the left side, lower shelf. The ones you read when you're excited about something. New are up high on the right, and the ones in the middle, those are the ones you keep meaning to read but never get around to. Dr. Martinez turned to look at the bookshelf, really look at it, and felt a chill run down her spine. Maya was absolutely right. Without even realizing it, Dr. Martinez had arranged her reference materials according to emotional associations and usage patterns. It was something she had never consciously noticed, but once Maya pointed it out, it was undeniable. How did you see that? People organize things the way they think, Maya said simply, and the way people think shows up in everything they do, if you know how to look for it. Dr. Martinez was beginning to understand that she was in the presence of something extraordinary. This wasn't just an intelligent child or even a gifted one. This was someone whose brain processed information in fundamentally different ways. Someone who could see patterns and connections that escaped even trained scientists. Maya, I need to ask you something important, and I want you to be completely honest with me. When you drew those patterns on the glass outside, did they mean something to you? Were they trying to tell you something? Maya was quiet for a long time, staring out the office window at the rain-soaked campus below. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They weren't just patterns, she said. They were. It's hard to explain. Like a language, but not words. More like instructions. Instructions for what? I don't know exactly. But when I was tracing them, it felt like I was writing down something important. Something that needed to be remembered. Dr. Martinez felt her heart racing. In the field of cognitive science, there had always been theories about visual languages, about ways of encoding information that transcended traditional symbols and words. But they had remained largely theoretical, mathematical models without real-world examples. Maya, would you be willing to try something? I have materials here, paper and pens and other things for drawing. Would you be willing to try creating more of these patterns so I can study them? Maya looked suspicious again. Study them how? I want to understand how your brain works, how you're able to see these connections that other people miss. If I can figure that out, it might help other people who see patterns the way you do, people who might be misunderstood or told they're imagining things. This seemed to strike a chord with Maya. There are other people like me? I think so. I think there might be more people with your kind of visual intelligence than we realize. But right now, we don't know how to recognize them or help them develop their abilities. Maya considered this for several minutes, her young face serious with thought. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but I want to understand what you're doing. I don't want to be some lab rat that gets studied and then forgotten about. That's absolutely fair. In fact, I think you might end up teaching me more than I teach you. Dr. Martinez cleared off a large section of her desk and gathered supplies, paper, pencils, markers, anything Maya might want to use. She also set up a small camera to record the process, explaining each step to Maya so there would be no surprises or hidden agendas. Maya settled into the chair across from Dr. Martinez's desk and stared at the blank paper for a long time. She picked up a pencil, then put it down. She tried a marker, then set that aside too. It's not working, she said finally. The patterns aren't coming. That's okay, Dr. Martinez said. There's no pressure. Maybe it only happens under certain conditions. Maya shook her head. No, that's not it. It's because I'm trying to force it. The patterns don't come when you're looking for them. They come when you're looking at something else and they just appear. This was another crucial insight. Forced pattern recognition was different from spontaneous pattern recognition. It suggested that Maya's abilities worked best when her conscious mind wasn't directing the process, when her subconscious visual processing systems were allowed to work freely. What were you thinking about when you drew on the glass outside? Maya thought about this. I was cold and tired, and I was watching. The rain on the glass. I wasn't thinking about anything specific, just watching. And then the patterns started to appear in the water drops and the fog, and I traced them because they seemed important. Dr. Martinez had an idea. What if we recreated those conditions? What if we found a way for you to just observe and let the patterns come naturally? She led Maya to the large window in her office that looked out over the campus. The rain was still falling, creating shifting patterns of water on the glass. Maya pressed her face close to the window and stared out into the darkness. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Maya's finger came up and began tracing lines on the glass, following movements that Dr. Martinez couldn't see. The patterns that emerged were different from the ones outside the building, but equally complex and purposeful. "There," Maya said, stepping back. "That one wants to be remembered too." Dr. Martinez looked at the tracings on her office window and felt the same electric recognition she had experienced earlier. These patterns had structure, logic, intentionality. They weren't random marks or childhood doodles. They were something else entirely. "Maya, when you say the patterns want to be remembered, what do you mean exactly?" "It's like, you know how sometimes you have a word on the tip of your tongue but you can't quite remember it? These patterns feel like that, except instead of words. It's like there's information trying to get out, and when I trace them, it's like I'm helping the information find its way." Dr. Martinez realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in cognitive science. Maya wasn't just recognizing patterns that were already there. She was receiving information through visual channels that scientists didn't even know existed. She was demonstrating a form of intelligence that challenged everything researchers thought they knew about human perception and cognition. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and please don't think I'm doubting you, but when you see these patterns, do you think they're coming from inside your mind, or do you think they're coming from somewhere else?" Maya considered this question seriously. "Both," she said finally. "It's like my mind is like a radio, and the patterns are like stations. The radio doesn't create the music, but without the radio, you can't hear it." The analogy was startling in its sophistication. Maya was describing her visual perception as a kind of receiving mechanism, something that could detect information that existed independently of her own thoughts and imagination. It was a concept that pushed the boundaries of conventional neuroscience into territories that felt almost metaphysical. Dr. Martinez spent the next hour asking Maya to describe her experiences in detail, taking careful notes and occasionally asking for clarification. What emerged was a picture of a child whose perceptual abilities operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Maya could see conventional patterns, the kind any intelligent person might notice, but she could also perceive what she called deeper patterns, structures of information that seemed to exist beneath the surface of normal visual experience. "It's like looking at a pond," Maya explained. "Most people see the surface of the water, maybe some reflections or ripples. But I can see down into the water, see the fish swimming around, see the plants growing on the bottom. The fish and plants were always there. I just have better eyes for seeing them." As the night wore on, Dr. Martinez found herself facing a dilemma she had never encountered in her academic career. She was sitting across from a homeless 12-year-old girl who appeared to possess cognitive abilities that science couldn't explain or even properly categorize. Maya's insights into pattern recognition were more sophisticated than those of graduate students. Her visual intelligence operated according to principles that didn't appear in any textbook or research paper. More troubling was the question of what to do next. Dr. Martinez couldn't simply send Maya back out into the rain, but she also couldn't keep her in the office indefinitely. Maya needed food, shelter, safety, and stability. She needed things that Dr. Martinez, for all her education and resources, wasn't equipped to provide. "Maya, can I ask you about your situation? Are you completely on your own?" The defensive walls went back up immediately. I told you I can take care of myself. I believe you, but taking care of yourself and being completely alone are different things. Do you have any family? Anyone who's looking out for you? Maya was quiet for a long time, staring out at the patterns she had traced on the window. There was my mom, she said finally, but she got sick and couldn't take care of me anymore. The state tried to put me in foster homes, but they never worked out. People don't know what to do with kids like me. What do you mean, kids like you? Kids who see things differently, kids who ask too many questions or notice things that make adults uncomfortable. After a while, it's easier to just be on your own. Dr. Martinez felt her heart breaking. Maya's story was tragically common among children with exceptional abilities that didn't fit conventional molds. The systems designed to protect and educate children often failed spectacularly when confronted with minds that operated outside normal parameters. Maya, what if I told you there might be a place where your way of seeing things would be valued, instead of feared? A place where people would want to understand your abilities rather than ignore them. Maya looked skeptical. You mean like a school for weird kids? Not weird. Gifted. Exceptional. Kids whose minds work in ways that could change how we understand intelligence itself. And you think Harvard is that place? Dr. Martinez paused. She knew Harvard's reputation for intellectual rigor and academic excellence. But she also knew its history of exclusion, its tendency to value conventional markers of intelligence over unconventional forms of brilliance. Would an institution that had spent centuries perfecting systems of academic achievement be willing to embrace a form of intelligence that couldn't be measured by standardized tests or graded assignments? I don't know, she admitted, but I think it could be. I think your abilities are exactly what places like Harvard need to see, to help them understand that intelligence comes in forms we haven't learned to recognize yet. Maya traced a small pattern on the foggy window with her finger, a simple spiral that seemed to contain infinite complexity. What would I have to do? I don't know that either. There's no protocol for a situation like this. We'd have to figure it out as we go. Together. Dr. Martinez looked at this extraordinary child, this homeless girl whose mind operated according to principles that could revolutionize cognitive science, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Together, she said. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the patterns Maya had traced on the building's glass. But in Dr. Martinez's office, new patterns were beginning to form. Patterns of possibility, of collaboration, of a future where different kinds of intelligence would be recognized and celebrated rather than feared and dismissed. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were about to embark on a journey that would challenge Harvard's most brilliant minds, reshape understanding of human potential, and prove that genius often appears in the most unexpected places, traced by small fingers on rain-soaked glass in the middle of the night. The first chapter of Maya's story at Harvard was about to begin, and it would test everything the institution thought it knew about intelligence, ability, and what it meant to be gifted. But that night, in a professor's office high above the sleeping campus, a 12-year-old girl finally found someone who saw her patterns not as symptoms of a troubled mind, but as evidence of an extraordinary one. And for the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she belonged. The morning sun cast long shadows across Harvard Yard as Dr. Elena Martinez made her way to the faculty administration building. She had spent the remainder of the night in her office with Maya, watching the girl sleep curled up in the spare chair while she frantically researched emergency housing options and university policies. Now 3 hours of sleep and 2 cups of coffee later, she was about to do something that could either launch her career into uncharted territory or end it entirely. Maya walked beside her, having washed her face in the faculty restroom and tied her hair back with a rubber band Dr. Martinez had found in her desk drawer. The girl wore the same layered clothing from the night before, but somehow she carried herself differently in the daylight. Where the rain-soaked child had seemed fragile and defensive, the Maya walking across Harvard's historic campus moved. With quiet confidence, her eyes constantly scanning and cataloging the patterns of student movement, architectural details, and social dynamics playing out around them. "There," Maya said suddenly, stopping in front of the Widener Library steps, where clusters of students were gathered in conversation. "Look at how they're standing." Dr. Martinez followed Maya's gaze, but saw only typical college students chatting before morning classes. What am I supposed to be seeing? The way they group themselves. It's not random. The students who are confident about their academic work stand in groups of 3 or 4, with open body language, facing each other directly. The ones who are struggling stand in pairs, with their bodies angled away from the main walkways like they're hiding. And the ones who are completely lost stand alone, but position themselves near the confident groups, hoping to overhear something useful. Dr. Martinez looked again and realized Maya was absolutely right. The unconscious social mapping was undeniable once it was pointed out. Students had arranged themselves according to academic anxiety levels without even realizing they were doing it. "How do you see these things so quickly?" Maya shrugged. "People think their feelings are private, but they show up everywhere. In how they walk, where they sit, even how they breathe. It's all patterns, just like the ones on the glass." They continued toward the administration building, but Dr. Martinez found herself seeing the campus differently through Maya's observational lens. Every interaction, every seemingly random detail suddenly seemed loaded with information about human behavior and social dynamics. It was like walking through the world with a new kind of vision. The faculty administration building was the imposing structure of red brick and ivy, designed to intimidate visitors and remind them of the institution's centuries of tradition and authority. Inside, the hallways were lined with portraits of distinguished professors and benefactors, their stern faces seeming to judge anyone who dared to suggest changes to established protocols. Dr. Martinez had requested an emergency meeting with Dr. Patricia Kenworth, the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, citing urgent circumstances that required immediate attention. Now sitting in the waiting area outside Dr. Kenworth's office, she was beginning to question the wisdom of her approach. How exactly does one explain that a homeless child possesses cognitive abilities that could revolutionize neuroscience? Maya sat quietly beside her, but Dr. Martinez noticed the girl's eyes were mapping escape routes and cataloging every person who entered or left the administrative offices. Old habits of survival were hard to break, even in the safety of Harvard's halls. "Dr. Martinez, Dr. Kenworth will see you now." The secretary, a middle-aged woman with carefully styled hair and a tone that suggested she had dealt with countless academic crises, gestured toward the inner office. Dr. Patricia Kenworth was exactly what central casting would order for a Harvard administrator. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a style that had probably been fashionable in the 1980s and hadn't changed since. Her office was designed to impress and intimidate, with leather-bound volumes of university regulations lining the walls and a massive mahogany desk that seemed to occupy half the room. "Dr. Martinez, please sit. I understand you have some kind of emergency situation." Dr. Kenworth's voice carried the weariness of someone who had heard every possible academic crisis and found most of them to be less urgent than faculty members believed. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. Dr. Kenworth, I'd like you to meet Maya. Maya, this is Dr. Kenworth, one of Harvard's senior administrators." Dr. Kenworth's eyes fell on Maya for the first time, and her expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed confusion. I see. And Maya is here because... Doctor. Martinez had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times during the sleepless night. But now, faced with Dr. Kenworth's skeptical gaze, all her carefully planned explanations seemed inadequate. Maya has demonstrated extraordinary cognitive abilities that I believe Harvard needs to examine. Specifically, she appears to possess forms of pattern recognition that go far beyond anything documented in current literature. Pattern recognition. Dr. Kenworth's tone suggested she was repeating the words to ensure she had heard correctly. And you discovered this how, exactly? Last night I found Maya outside the Cognitive Science building. She had created visual patterns on the glass windows that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of information encoding and visual languages. I've spent my entire career studying these phenomena, and I've never seen anything like what Maya can do. Dr. Kenworth leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her. Dr. Martinez, I hope you understand how this sounds. You're asking me to believe that a child, apparently homeless and without formal education, has somehow mastered concepts that challenge our best researchers. Maya had been silent throughout the exchange, but now she spoke up. You don't believe her? I beg your pardon. Dr. Martinez, you don't believe what she's telling you about me. You think she's either lying or confused. Dr. Kenworth's cheeks flushed slightly. Young lady, this is an administrative meeting between faculty members. It's not appropriate for you to... You're sitting with your arms crossed and your shoulders raised. Your breathing is shallow and quick. You keep looking at your computer screen instead of at Dr. Martinez when she's talking. And you're tapping your pen in groups of 3, which means you're counting down until this meeting is over. Maya's voice was calm and matter-of-fact. Those are all patterns that show up when people have already decided not to believe something, before they've heard all the evidence. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Kenworth slowly lowered her arms and set down her pen, apparently unaware that she had been displaying exactly the behaviors Maya had described. How did you... Dr. Kenworth started, then stopped herself. People think their thoughts are invisible, but they're not, Maya said. They show up in how you move your body, how you arrange things on your desk, even how you breathe. Dr. Martinez is nervous because she knows this sounds impossible, but she's also excited because she knows what she saw. You're skeptical because someone taught you that intelligence looks a certain way, and I don't look like that. Dr. Martinez watched in amazement as Maya, without raising her voice or showing any emotion, completely dismantled Dr. Kenworth's resistance through simple observation and logical deduction. It was like watching a master chess player execute a complex strategy that seemed effortless, but was actually the result of seeing patterns and possibilities that remained invisible to everyone else. Dr. Kenworth was quiet for a long time, studying Maya with new attention. What else can you tell me about what you observe? Maya looked around the office, her eyes taking in details that Dr. Martinez had never noticed. You have 3 different pens on your desk, but you only use the black one. The blue one was a gift from someone important to you, but you don't like how it writes. The red one is for special occasions, but you never have occasions that feel special enough. The way you've arranged your books tells me you value order and tradition, but the ones you actually read are the ones that are slightly out of place. And that picture on your desk is turned just a little bit away from visitors, which means it's personal and private, but you still want it where you can see it while you work. Dr. Kenworth's hand moved unconsciously toward the photograph Maya had mentioned. It was a picture of a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, with Dr. Kenworth's eyes and a bright, mischievous smile. That's my daughter, Dr. Kenworth said quietly. She died in a car accident 12 years ago. The admission hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Maya nodded as if this information completed a puzzle she had been working on. You keep her picture turned away because you don't want other people's sympathy, but you need to see her face when you're making important decisions. And right now, you're trying to decide whether to help me or follow the rules that make your job easier. Dr. Martinez realized that Maya had done something extraordinary. In less than 10 minutes, she had moved the conversation from academic skepticism to human connection. She had shown Dr. Kenworth that her abilities weren't just intellectual curiosities, but tools for understanding and connecting with people in ways that transcended conventional social interactions. Dr. Kenworth was silent for several minutes, her eyes moving between Maya and the photograph on her desk. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its administrative coldness. "What exactly are you asking Harvard to do?" Dr. Martinez took a deep breath. "I'm asking for the opportunity to study Maya's abilities in a formal academic setting. I want to understand how her mind processes visual information, how she recognizes patterns that others can't see, and what her insights might teach us about human cognition and intelligence." "And Maya, what do you want?" Maya had been prepared for questions about her abilities, but no one had asked her what she actually wanted. "I want to understand why I see things differently. I want to know if there are other people like me. And I want to help Dr. Martinez figure out how brains work, because maybe that will help people who think differently not feel so alone." Dr. Kenworth nodded slowly. "The university has protocols for special circumstances, but nothing that directly addresses a situation like this. Maya, you're not formally enrolled as a student, and you're well below the age of our typical participants. Dr. Martinez, your research involves human subjects, which requires ethics committee approval and parental consent." "I don't have parents," Maya said simply. "I'm what they call a ward of the state, but I've been on my own for almost 2 years." This presented a complex legal and ethical situation that Dr. Kenworth had never encountered. That complicates things significantly. We would need to involve social services, establish legal guardianship, ensure proper housing and education. Dr. Martinez felt their opportunity slipping away. "Dr. Kenworth, I understand the complications, but Maya's abilities represent a potential breakthrough in understanding human intelligence. If we get bogged down in bureaucracy, we might lose the chance to learn something that could benefit countless other people. And if we proceed without proper oversight, we could harm a vulnerable child and expose the university to massive liability." Dr. Kenworth's administrative training was reasserting itself. "There are procedures for a reason, Dr. Martinez." Maya had been listening to this exchange with growing frustration. "You're both talking about me like I'm not here, like I'm a problem to be solved, instead of a person who can make her own decisions." "Maya, you're 12 years old," Dr. Kenworth said gently. "The law doesn't recognize your right to make these kinds of decisions for yourself." "The law doesn't recognize a lot of things that are real," Maya replied. "It doesn't recognize that some kids can take care of themselves better than adults can take care of them. It doesn't recognize that intelligence comes in different forms. And it doesn't recognize that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when people stop following rules and start paying attention to what's actually happening." Dr. Martinez realized that Maya had just articulated one of the fundamental tensions in academic research: the conflict between institutional requirements and scientific discovery. Universities were designed to protect and preserve, but breakthrough research often required taking risks that institutions were reluctant to accept. "Maya raises an important point," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "Some of the most significant advances in science have come from researchers who were willing to challenge established protocols when they encountered phenomena that didn't fit existing frameworks. Dr. Kenworth looked uncomfortable. That's all very idealistic, Dr. Martinez, but we live in the real world. We have responsibilities to our students, our faculty, and our community. We can't simply ignore regulations because we encounter an interesting case study. Maya stood up from her chair and walked to the window that looked out over Harvard Yard. Students were hurrying between classes, their movements creating patterns of flow and convergence that seemed to follow invisible rules of social dynamics and architectural design. Dr. Kenworth, can I ask you something? Maya's voice was thoughtful, without a trace of challenge or confrontation. Of course. When your daughter was alive, did she ever ask you questions that you didn't know how to answer? Questions that made you realize she saw the world differently than you expected? Dr. Kenworth's breath caught slightly. Yes. Sarah was always asking things that surprised me. She saw connections between ideas that I never would have noticed. And when she asked those questions, did you tell her to wait until she was older? Or did you try to find answers together? We explored together. Sarah's curiosity was one of the things I loved most about her. Maya turned back from the window. I'm asking the same thing Sarah was asking. I'm asking for someone to explore with me, to help me understand why I see in patterns that other people don't see. The only difference is that Sarah had a mother who loved her enough to take risks for her curiosity, and I don't have anyone except Dr. Martinez. The emotional weight of Maya's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Dr. Kenworth's careful administrative composure cracked, and for a moment she looked like a mother who had lost her child rather than a university official protecting institutional interests. What specific accommodations would you need? Dr. Kenworth asked quietly. Dr. Martinez felt a surge of hope. Initially, I would need permission to include Maya in my research as a special participant. We would need to document her abilities, understand how they work, and explore their implications for cognitive science. From a practical standpoint, Maya would need temporary housing, access to university facilities, and educational support. Educational support meaning what exactly? I don't learn the same way other kids do, Maya said. I can't sit in a classroom and memorize things from textbooks. But if someone shows me how ideas connect to each other, how patterns work together, I can understand really complicated things. Dr. Kenworth was taking notes now, her administrative mind shifting from obstacle identification to problem solving. We would need to establish you as a special research participant rather than a traditional student. That would give us more flexibility in terms of age requirements and educational background, but it would also mean you wouldn't be working toward a degree or following a standard curriculum. I don't want a degree, Maya said. I want to understand how my mind works and help other people who think differently. The housing situation is more complex, Dr. Kenworth continued. University dormitories are designed for students 18 and older. We would need to find appropriate accommodations that provide both independence and oversight. Dr. Martinez had been thinking about this problem throughout the night. What about the faculty guest quarters? They're designed for visiting researchers and their families. Maya could stay there while we work out a more permanent arrangement. That's possible, but it would require approval from the housing committee and ongoing supervision from social services. Dr. Kenworth was warming to the logistical challenge. We would also need to establish educational benchmarks to ensure Maya is receiving appropriate academic development. Maya had been listening to this practical discussion with growing confidence. These adults were no longer debating whether to help her, but how to make it work within existing systems. Can I make a suggestion? Please, instead of trying to fit me into programs that already exist, what if we created something new, like a pilot program for kids who learn differently? That way, you're not breaking rules, you're making new ones. Dr. Kenworth and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances. Maya had just proposed a solution that could address both the institutional concerns and the research opportunities. A pilot program would allow Harvard to study exceptional cognitive abilities while developing new models for supporting unconventional learners. A pilot program would require approval from the Academic Council and the Board of Trustees, Dr. Kenworth said thoughtfully. But it's not unprecedented. Harvard has launched innovative educational initiatives before when presented, with compelling cases. How long would that approval process take? Dr. Martinez asked. Under normal circumstances, several months. But if we frame this as urgent research with immediate educational implications, we might be able to expedite the process, especially if we can demonstrate that Maya's abilities represent genuine breakthroughs in cognitive science. Maya had returned to the window and was tracing patterns in the condensation with her finger. Dr. Kenworth, there's something else you should know. What's that? I'm not the only one. There are other kids like me, kids who see patterns that adults miss. Most of them are in foster care or juvenile detention or living on the streets, because the adults in their lives don't know what to do with children who think differently. Dr. Kenworth's pen stopped moving. How many others? I don't know exactly, but when you live on the streets, you meet all kinds of people. And some of the kids I've met, they see things the way I do. They understand patterns in music or numbers or human behavior that seem impossible to adults. But instead of being recognized as gifted, they're labeled as troubled or difficult. Dr. Martinez felt the implications of Maya's revelation hitting her like a physical force. If Maya was representative of a larger population of children with extraordinary cognitive abilities, the research potential was staggering. But more importantly, it suggested that society was systematically failing to recognize and nurture a form of intelligence that could benefit everyone. Maya, would these other children be willing to participate in research if we could find them and provide appropriate support? If they trusted that someone actually wanted to understand them instead of fix them, yes. But most of these kids have been hurt by adults who promised to help them. It would take time to build that trust. Dr. Kenworth was writing furiously. Now, her administrative mind racing through the possibilities and challenges of what Maya was describing. You're talking about developing an entirely new approach to identifying and supporting gifted children. The implications for education policy alone would be enormous. Which is exactly why we need to move carefully but quickly, Dr. Martinez said. Maya has given us a window into forms of intelligence that we've been missing entirely. But if we don't act soon, we might lose the opportunity to understand and help these children. Maya had finished tracing patterns on the window and returned to her chair. Dr. Kenworth, I have one more request. What's that? When you talk to the other administrators about this, don't just tell them about my abilities. Tell them about Sarah. Tell them that kids like me ask the same kinds of questions Sarah asked, and we deserve the same kind of curiosity and support she had. Dr. Kenworth's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. I'll do that. And Maya, yes, Sarah would have liked you very much. She always stood up for the underdogs too. The meeting concluded with Dr. Kenworth agreeing to present Maya's case to the Academic Council as an emergency proposal for a pilot program studying exceptional cognitive abilities in children. Dr. Martinez would prepare a formal research proposal outlining the scientific objectives and methodology. Maya would undergo a comprehensive evaluation to document her abilities and establish baselines for ongoing study. As they left the administration building, Dr. Martinez felt cautiously optimistic. They had cleared the first major hurdle by getting institutional support for the research, but she also knew that the real challenges were just beginning. They would need to navigate university politics, research ethics, and public scrutiny, while trying to understand cognitive abilities that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about human intelligence. Maya seemed less concerned about the administrative complexities and more interested in the immediate environment around them. As they walked across the campus, she pointed out patterns in student behavior, architectural details, and natural phenomena that Dr. Martinez had never noticed despite spending years at Harvard. "Dr. Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you study my brain, will it help you understand how other people's minds work too?" "I think so. Understanding how your pattern recognition works might help us figure out why some people are better at seeing certain kinds of connections than others. It might help us develop better ways to teach children who learn differently." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Because the most important pattern I see is that people are much more similar than they think they are. They just show their intelligence in different ways." As they walked back toward the cognitive science building, Dr. Martinez realized that Maya had already begun teaching her things that weren't in any textbook or research paper. The girl's insights into human behavior and social dynamics were as sophisticated as her visual pattern recognition abilities. She wasn't just a research subject with interesting cognitive abilities. She was a young philosopher with profound understanding of human nature and social systems. The afternoon was spent in Dr. Martinez's laboratory, where Maya underwent a series of cognitive assessments designed to establish baselines for her abilities. Unlike traditional intelligence tests that focused on verbal and mathematical skills, these evaluations examined spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, and visual processing capabilities. Maya approached each test with the same calm curiosity she brought to everything else. When presented with complex geometric puzzles, she solved them not through trial and error, but by seeing underlying structural relationships that made the solutions obvious. When asked to identify patterns in sequences of shapes or numbers, she found connections that the test designers hadn't intended and offered multiple valid solutions to problems that were supposed to have single correct answers. "Maya, this test is supposed to measure how quickly you can identify visual patterns," Dr. Martinez explained as she set up the next assessment. "I'm going to show you a series of images, and you tell me what comes next in the sequence." "Okay, but can I also tell you about the patterns the test makers didn't notice?" Dr. Martinez paused. "What do you mean?" "Well, the person who designed this test was trying to measure one kind of pattern recognition, but they accidentally created several other patterns that are more interesting than the ones they meant to include. This was exactly the kind of insight that made Maya so extraordinary. She didn't just answer the questions being asked. She saw beyond the questions to understand the assumptions and limitations built into the testing process itself. For the next 2 hours, Maya worked through assessments while simultaneously providing commentary on the tests themselves. She identified biases in question design, pointed out alternative solutions that revealed different kinds of intelligence, and suggested modifications that would make the evaluations more inclusive of diverse cognitive styles. Dr. Martinez found herself taking as many notes about Maya's observations on the testing process as about her performance on the actual tests. The girl was inadvertently conducting a meta-analysis of cognitive assessment methodology while demonstrating abilities that transcended traditional measurements of intelligence. "Maya, in all your observations of patterns, have you ever noticed anything that scared you or made you uncomfortable?" Maya considered this question carefully. "Sometimes I see patterns in people that they don't want anyone to notice. Like when someone is lying or when they're planning to hurt someone. Those patterns are clear to me, but pointing them out usually makes people angry." "Can you give me an example?" "There was a foster father who took me in for a few months. He seemed nice to the social workers, but I could see patterns in how he looked at me and how he moved when adults weren't watching. The way he stood too close, the way his breathing changed when he thought about things he shouldn't think about. I tried to tell my caseworker, but she said I was being paranoid and difficult. Dr. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. What happened? I left before anything bad could happen, but I heard later that other kids complained about him too, and eventually someone believed them. The patterns were always there, but adults don't know how to see them until it's too late. This revelation opened up an entirely new dimension of Maya's abilities. Her pattern recognition wasn't just intellectually fascinating, it was a survival skill that had protected her from dangerous situations and predatory adults. She could read intentions and motivations that remained hidden from conventional observation. Maya, have you ever tried to teach other people how to see the patterns you see? Sometimes, but it's hard because most people think their eyes already show them everything that's important. They don't understand that vision isn't just about what you look at, it's about how you look at it. What do you mean? Maya walked to the laboratory's whiteboard and picked up a marker. She drew a simple circle, then added a few lines inside it. To Dr. Martinez, it looked like a basic geometric shape with some random marks. What do you see? Maya asked. A circle with some lines in it. Maya added a few more marks, and suddenly, the image snapped into focus. It was a face hidden in the geometric shapes, but unmistakably human once you saw it. The face was always there, Maya explained. I just had to help you see it. Most patterns are like that. They're obvious once someone shows you how to look, but invisible until then. Dr. Martinez stared at the drawing, amazed by how completely her perception had shifted. One moment she saw abstract shapes. The next moment she saw a clear image. That seemed impossible to miss. It was a perfect demonstration of how pattern recognition could be taught and learned. Maya, do you think you could teach this kind of seeing to other people? Could you help them learn to recognize patterns they're currently missing? Maybe, but it would take time, and people would have to want to learn. Most adults think they already know how to see, so they don't think they need to learn anything new. As the afternoon wore on, Dr. Martinez began to understand that Maya's abilities represented more than just an interesting case study in cognitive science. The girl possessed forms of intelligence that could revolutionize how people understood perception, learning, and human potential. Her insights into pattern recognition, social dynamics, and visual processing could benefit fields ranging from education to psychology to artificial intelligence. But perhaps most importantly, Maya represented hope for countless other children whose different ways of thinking had been misunderstood or dismissed. If Harvard could develop new approaches to recognizing and nurturing unconventional intelligence, it might prevent other gifted children from falling through the cracks of systems designed for more conventional learners. As the sun began to set over Cambridge, Dr. Martinez and Maya prepared to leave the laboratory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they waited for the university's response to their proposal and began the complex process of documenting abilities that defied traditional categorization. Dr. Martinez, can I ask you one more thing? Of course. When people find out about what I can do, they're going to want to study me and test me and figure out how my brain works. But I want to make sure we don't forget the most important thing. What's that? Maya looked out the laboratory window at the patterns of light and shadow playing across the campus as students hurried to evening activities. The point isn't to prove that I'm special. The point is to prove that everyone is special in ways we just haven't learned to see yet. With those words, Maya had articulated the deeper purpose of their collaboration. They weren't just studying exceptional abilities in one remarkable child. They were working to expand human understanding of intelligence itself, to create space for forms of brilliance that had been overlooked or misunderstood, and to ensure that no child's extraordinary mind would ever again be dismissed as ordinary trouble. The real work was just beginning, but Maya had already taught Dr. Martinez the most important lesson of all. Genius often appears in unexpected forms, and the greatest discoveries come from learning to see patterns that have been hiding in plain sight all along. The emergency session of Harvard's Academic Council convened on a gray Tuesday morning in Loeb House, the university's executive meeting facility. Dr. Patricia Kenworth had called the session with only 48 hours' notice, citing circumstances that required immediate review and decision. The 12 council members who gathered around the polished conference table represented Harvard's most senior academic leadership, individuals whose collective decisions shape the direction of one of the world's most prestigious institutions. Dr. Richard Blackwood, the council chair and Harvard's longest-serving administrator, reviewed the agenda with visible skepticism. At 67, he had overseen countless emergency sessions, dealing with everything from faculty scandals to budget crises. But he had never been asked to consider admitting a homeless 12-year-old as a special research participant. Dr. Kenworth, before we begin, I want to ensure I understand the situation correctly, Dr. Blackwood said, adjusting his reading glasses. You're asking this council to approve an unprecedented arrangement for a child with no formal education, no family support, and no documented academic achievement. That's correct, but with significant caveats, Dr. Kenworth replied. Maya demonstrates cognitive abilities that our leading researchers believe represent breakthroughs in understanding human intelligence. Dr. Martinez has provided documentation that suggests this child's pattern recognition capabilities exceed anything in current literature. Dr. Sarah Chen, Harvard's youngest council member and head of the Innovation Initiative, leaned forward. What kind of documentation? Standardized test scores? Peer-reviewed assessments? The situation doesn't lend itself to standardized measurement, Dr. Kenworth admitted. Maya's abilities manifest in ways that our current testing protocols weren't designed to evaluate. She sees patterns in visual information, social dynamics, and complex systems that trained researchers miss entirely. Professor James Whitfield, a stern man in his 70s who had spent 4 decades defending Harvard's academic standards, made no effort to hide his disapproval. Dr. Kenworth, we have admission standards and evaluation procedures for good reasons. We can't simply abandon centuries of academic rigor because someone claims to have discovered an exceptional child. With respect, Professor Whitfield, our admission standards are designed to identify students who can succeed within existing educational frameworks, Dr. Kenworth responded. But what if those frameworks aren't adequate for recognizing all forms of intelligence? What if we're systematically overlooking exceptional abilities because they don't fit our traditional models? Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. There's precedent for that concern. Look at how long it took institutions to recognize different learning styles, or to understand that creativity and intelligence can manifest in non-verbal ways. Maybe we're facing a similar challenge with this child. Professor Whitfield remained unmoved. Precedent or not, we have responsibilities to our existing students, our faculty, and our reputation. We can't turn Harvard into an experimental laboratory for unproven educational theories. Dr. Blackwood raised his hand for silence. Let's focus on specifics. Dr. Kenworth, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we establish Maya as a special research participant in Dr. Martinez's cognitive science program. This would allow her to access university facilities and participate in research while we develop appropriate educational support. Think of it as a pilot program for identifying and nurturing unconventional intelligence. And the practical considerations, asked Dr. Margaret Foster, Harvard's legal counsel. Housing, supervision, liability, educational requirements. We've identified solutions for each of those issues, Dr. Kenworth said, consulting her notes. Maya would stay in faculty guest housing with appropriate supervision. Her educational program would be designed around her specific learning style rather than traditional curriculum requirements. And legal liability would be managed through research participant protocols rather than student enrollment procedures. Dr. Foster frowned. That's assuming we can get approval from social services, the ethics committee, and probably half a dozen other oversight bodies. This child is a ward of the state, which complicates everything significantly. Professor Elizabeth Warren, Harvard's expert on educational policy, had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke up. I'd like to hear more about this child's actual abilities. Dr. Kenworth, you've told us she demonstrates exceptional pattern recognition, but can you be more specific? Dr. Kenworth had anticipated this question and came prepared. Maya can identify complex patterns in visual information that trained researchers miss. She can read social dynamics and predict human behavior with remarkable accuracy. She can see mathematical relationships in natural phenomena without formal training in mathematics. And she can create visual representations of information that appear to encode data in ways we don't yet understand. That sounds impressive, but also rather vague, Professor Warren said. Do we have any objective evidence of these abilities? Dr. Martinez has been conducting preliminary assessments, and the results are extraordinary. Maya consistently solves problems that stump graduate students. She identifies patterns in data that PhD researchers miss, and she does it all through pure visual intuition rather than formal analytical training. Dr. Chen looked intrigued. If that's accurate, it suggests she's developed alternative cognitive pathways for processing information. From a neuroscience perspective, that could be incredibly valuable to study. Professor Whitfield remained skeptical. Or it suggests that our assessments are flawed, or that this child has simply been coached to perform certain tasks. Extraordinary. Claims require extraordinary evidence, and I'm not hearing anything that couldn't be explained through more conventional means. Dr. Blackwood had been listening to the debate with growing frustration. This discussion is becoming circular. Dr. Kenworth, is there any way for this council to actually observe this child's abilities firsthand? To evaluate the claims being made about her cognitive capabilities? Dr. Kenworth had hoped to avoid this request, knowing that Maya's abilities didn't perform well under pressure or formal evaluation. That's possible, but Maya's pattern recognition works best in natural, unstructured environments. Formal testing situations tend to inhibit rather than demonstrate her capabilities. Then perhaps we need to create an informal evaluation, Dr. Chen suggested, something that would allow council members to observe her abilities without the pressure of formal assessment. Professor Whitfield looked skeptical. And how exactly would we do that? Ask her to perform party tricks for the entertainment of Harvard's senior administrators. Dr. Kenworth had an idea. What if we invited Maya to attend a portion of this meeting, let her observe our decision-making process, and see what patterns she identifies in our discussions? If her abilities are genuine, she should be able to provide insights into group dynamics and institutional behavior that surprise us. The suggestion created an uncomfortable silence. The idea of having a 12-year-old homeless girl analyze Harvard's senior leadership felt unprecedented and potentially embarrassing, but it also offered a way to evaluate Maya's claimed abilities in a real-world context. Dr. Foster raised practical concerns. Is it appropriate to have a child observe confidential administrative discussions, and what if her observations are unflattering or problematic? Maya's insights tend to be accurate rather than flattering, Dr. Kenworth. Admitted, but accuracy is exactly what we need to evaluate her abilities. Dr. Blackwood looked around the table, reading the expressions and body language of his colleagues, all in favor of inviting this child to observe a portion of our discussion. 7 hands went up, including Dr. Chen's and, surprisingly, Dr. E. Foster's. 5 hands remained down, including Professor Whitfield's and 3 other senior members. The motion carries, Dr. Blackwood announced. Dr. Kenworth, please invite Maya to join us for the next 30 minutes, but I want it understood that this is an evaluation, not an entertainment. We're here to make a serious decision about Harvard's academic policies. 20 minutes later, Maya entered the Loeb House conference room, accompanied by Dr. Martinez. The girl had been provided with clean clothes from a campus store, but she still carried herself with the careful awareness of someone who had learned to navigate potentially dangerous adult environments. The council members studied Maya with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She looked exactly like what she was, a young girl who had been living on the streets, intelligent but unpolished, alert but wary. Nothing about her appearance suggested exceptional cognitive abilities or academic potential. Maya, thank you for joining us, Dr. Blackwood said formally. We understand that Dr. Martinez believes you have unusual abilities related to pattern recognition and observation. We'd like to understand what that means. Maya looked around the table, her eyes taking in details that the adults had stopped noticing about each other and their environment. You want me to prove that I see things you don't see? That's one way to put it, Dr. Blackwood replied. Maya was quiet for a moment, her gaze moving systematically around the room. Dr. Blackwood, you called this an emergency meeting, but it's not really an emergency for you. You already decided what you think about my situation before I walked in. You're going through this process because Dr. Kenworth asked you to, but you expect it to confirm what you already believe. Dr. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. And what do I already believe? You believe that intelligence looks a certain way, sounds a certain way, and comes from certain kinds of backgrounds. You believe that Harvard's reputation depends on maintaining standards that exclude people like me. And you believe that making exceptions, even for good reasons, weakens the institution you've spent your career protecting. The accuracy of Maya's assessment was evident in Dr. Blackwood's expression, though he tried to maintain professional composure. That's a perceptive observation. What else do you see? Maya turned her attention to the other council members. Dr. Chen, you're genuinely curious about how my mind works, but you're also worried that supporting me might hurt your career. You're the youngest person here, and you still have to prove yourself to colleagues who see innovation as a threat to tradition. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. How do you know that? The way you sit tells me you're interested, but cautious. You keep looking at Professor Whitfield when you agree with something I say, like you're checking his reaction. And your hands keep moving toward your phone, which means you're thinking about research possibilities, but also about covering yourself politically. Professor Whitfield leaned forward. And what do you observe about me? Maya studied him carefully. You're not really against me personally. You're against what I represent. You've spent decades building Harvard's reputation for academic excellence, and you see kids like me as a threat to everything you've worked for. But there's something else. What's that? You had a student once, maybe years ago, who reminded you of me, someone who was brilliant but didn't fit the system, and you failed them somehow, or the system failed them, and you've regretted it ever since. But Professor Whitfield's face went pale. The other council members exchanged glances, clearly seeing something in his reaction that confirmed Maya's observation. How could you possibly know that? Professor Whitfield asked quietly. Because people carry their regrets in how they hold their shoulders, how they breathe when certain topics come up, how they react when they see reminders of past mistakes. You're not fighting against me. You're fighting against the memory of someone you couldn't help. The room fell silent. Maya had done something that formal psychological evaluations and decades of professional interaction had never accomplished. She had seen through Professor Whitfield's institutional persona to understand the personal experiences that shaped his administrative decisions. Dr. Foster cleared her throat. Maya, what do you see when you look at this group as a whole? What patterns do you notice in how we function together? Maya stood up and walked to the large windows that overlooked Harvard Yard. You function like a family that's been together too long. Everyone knows everyone else's opinions before they express them. Dr. Blackwood plays the father role, trying to maintain order and tradition. Dr. Chen is the ambitious daughter, trying to prove herself while respecting authority. Professor Whitfield is the protective grandfather, guarding against threats to family stability. She turned back to face the group. But the real pattern is that you all care deeply about Harvard and want to do what's best for it. The disagreement isn't about values. It's about whether doing what's best means protecting what you have or taking risks to become something better. Dr. Martinez had been watching the council members' reactions and realized that Maya was accomplishing something extraordinary. In less than 15 minutes, she had provided insights into group dynamics and individual motivations that could have taken professional consultants months to develop. Dr. Kenworth seized the moment. This is exactly what Maya's abilities could offer Harvard. She sees patterns in human behavior, institutional dynamics, and complex systems that could revolutionize how we understand everything from education to organizational management. Professor Warren, who had been quiet throughout Maya's observations, finally spoke. Maya, when you see these patterns in people and groups, do you also see solutions? Do you understand how to change or improve the dynamics you observe? Maya nodded. Usually, but people don't always want solutions. Sometimes they want to keep their problems because changing would be harder than complaining. What would be your solution for this group? Maya looked around the table one more time. You're trying to decide whether I belong at Harvard, but that's the wrong question. The right question is whether Harvard is ready to expand its definition of belonging. You could create something new here, something that recognizes intelligence in all its forms instead of just the forms you're used to seeing. And how would we do that? Start small, create a pilot program for kids who think differently, study us, learn from us, figure out how to help us develop our abilities, then use what you learn to help all students, not just the ones who already fit your systems. Dr. Chen was taking notes rapidly. Maya, you're describing a fundamental shift in how educational institutions identify and nurture talent. The implications for admission policies, curriculum design, and assessment methodology would be enormous. But necessary, Maya replied, because right now, you're missing kids who could change the world simply because they don't look like what you expect genius to look like. Dr. Blackwood had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. Maya, assuming we approved some version of Dr. Kenworth's proposal, what would you hope to accomplish during your time at Harvard? I want to understand how my mind works and help Dr. Martinez figure out how other minds work too. I want to find other kids like me and help them feel less alone. And I want to prove that intelligence comes in more forms than most people realize. And what would you need from us to accomplish those goals? Maya's answer was simple and profound. Trust. Trust that I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone else. Trust that different doesn't mean wrong. And trust that sometimes the best discoveries come from people you don't expect. Professor Whitfield had been unusually quiet since Maya's personal observation about his past student. Now he spoke up, his voice softer than usual. "Maya, the student you mentioned, the one who reminded me of you. Her name was Jennifer. She was brilliant but unconventional, and she didn't fit our standard programs. I recommended that she transfer to a more flexible institution, thinking it would be better for her. What happened to her? She dropped out of school entirely. I heard later that she had revolutionary ideas about environmental science, but no institution would take her seriously because she didn't have the right credentials. She ended up working in complete obscurity, and the world lost the benefit of her insights." Maya nodded sympathetically. "You didn't fail her, Professor Whitfield. The system failed both of you, but that doesn't have to happen again." Professor Whitfield looked at Maya for a long moment, then turned to his colleagues. "I changed my position. I think we should approve this pilot program." The shift in the room's dynamics was palpable. If Professor Whitfield, Harvard's most traditional defender of academic standards, was willing to support Maya's admission, it created space for other council members to express their support as well. Dr. Chen spoke up immediately. "I agree. The potential research benefits alone justify the risk, but beyond that, we have an opportunity to pioneer new approaches to identifying and supporting exceptional talent." Dr. Foster remained practical in her concerns. "I still worry about the legal and administrative complications, but those are problems we can solve. If the academic case is compelling, we can work through the logistics." One by one, the other council members expressed their positions. Some remained skeptical about the precedent they would be setting, but Maya's demonstration of her abilities had shifted the conversation from whether she possessed exceptional cognitive capabilities to whether Harvard was prepared to embrace new forms of intelligence. Dr. Blackwood called for a formal vote. All in favor of approving Dr. Kenworth's proposal to establish Maya as a special research participant in a pilot program for studying exceptional cognitive abilities. This time, 10 hands went up. Only 2 members voted against the proposal, and both indicated that their concerns were procedural rather than substantive. "The motion carries," Dr. Blackwood announced. "Dr. Kenworth, please work with Dr. Martinez to develop detailed protocols for this pilot program. Dr. Foster, please coordinate with legal and administrative offices to address the practical requirements. And Maya." Dr. Blackwood paused, looking at the girl who had just convinced Harvard's senior leadership to take an unprecedented risk. "Welcome to Harvard. I hope we prove worthy of your trust." Maya's response was characteristically direct. "Thank you. I hope I prove worthy of yours." "Dame," as the council members filed out of the conference room, many stopped to speak privately with Maya or Dr. Martinez. The shift in their attitude was remarkable. They had entered the meeting skeptical of claims about a homeless child's exceptional abilities and left as advocates for expanding Harvard's understanding of human intelligence. Professor Whitfield was the last to leave. He approached Maya and spoke quietly. "Jennifer would have liked you. She always believed that the most important discoveries come from seeing things that everyone else misses." "Maybe she still will," Maya replied. "Maybe when people hear about what we're doing here, she'll realize that it's not too late to share her ideas with the world." Professor Whitfield smiled sadly. "Perhaps you're right. In any case, I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to ensure your success here." As Maya and Dr. Martinez left Loeb House, the magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in. Harvard University, one of the world's most prestigious and tradition-bound institutions, had just agreed to fundamentally rethink its approach to identifying and nurturing exceptional talent. But the real test was yet to come. Approval from The academic council was just the first step in a complex process that would require coordination between multiple departments, oversight bodies, and support services. Maya would need housing, educational programming, research protocols, and ongoing evaluation systems that didn't yet exist. More challenging still would be the public attention that was certain to follow. News of Harvard's decision to admit a homeless 12-year-old would attract media coverage, academic scrutiny, and probably criticism from those who saw it as either dangerous precedent-setting or publicity-seeking sensationalism. Maya seemed less concerned about these challenges than the adults around her. As they walked across Harvard Yard toward the Cognitive Science Building, she was already focused on the work ahead, rather than the obstacles they might encounter. Dr. Martinez, when do we start the research? We can begin immediately with more detailed cognitive assessments and brain imaging studies. But Maya, you should understand that there will be a lot of attention focused on our work. People will want to know everything about you and your abilities. Maya shrugged. People have always stared at me for one reason or another. At least this time, it's because they think I might be smart instead of because they think I'm trouble. It might be more intense than you expect. Reporters, researchers from other institutions, people who want to prove that your abilities aren't real. Let them try, Maya said with quiet confidence. The patterns don't lie, even when people want them to. Dr. Martinez realized that Maya had just articulated something crucial about the challenges ahead. The girl's abilities weren't based on tricks or performance. They emerged from genuine cognitive differences that could be studied, documented, and verified through rigorous scientific methods. As they entered the Cognitive Science Building, Dr. Martinez felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility that she had never experienced in her academic career. She was about to embark on research that could revolutionize understanding of human intelligence, but she was also responsible for protecting and nurturing a vulnerable child whose extraordinary mind had already survived more hardship than most adults ever faced. Maya paused at the elevator and looked back toward the administration building where the council meeting had taken place. Dr. Martinez, can I ask you something? Of course. When the other researchers find out about me and when they start studying kids like me, will you make sure they remember that we're people first and research subjects second? The question revealed Maya's wisdom about the challenges they would face. She understood that her exceptional abilities would make her valuable to researchers, but she also knew the dangers of being treated as a specimen rather than a human being. I promise, Dr. Martinez said, we'll never forget that the most important pattern we're studying is how to help children like you thrive in a world that hasn't learned to see your kind of intelligence yet. Maya smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Dr. Martinez had seen from her. Then I think we're going to do important work together. As the elevator carried them up to the laboratory, where Maya's formal research participation would begin, both of them understood that they were crossing a threshold. Behind them lay a world where different forms of intelligence were often misunderstood or dismissed. Ahead lay the possibility of creating new understanding of human potential and new opportunities for children whose minds worked in extraordinary ways. The real work was just beginning, but Maya had already accomplished something remarkable. She had convinced one of the world's most prestigious institutions to question its fundamental assumptions about intelligence, ability, and human potential. More importantly, she had done it not through credentials or connections, but through the pure power of seeing patterns that others had missed. In the coming days and weeks, Maya would face new challenges as her abilities were subjected to rigorous scientific study and public scrutiny. But she would also have opportunities to help other children who thought differently, to advance scientific understanding of human cognition, and to prove that genius often appears in the most unexpected places. The patterns Maya had traced on rain-soaked glass had already begun to change Harvard University. Soon, they would begin to change the world's understanding of what it means to be gifted, different, and extraordinarily human. 6 months later, Dr. Martinez stood before the International Conference on Cognitive Science, preparing to present findings that would fundamentally alter how the scientific community understood human intelligence. The auditorium was packed with researchers, educators, and journalists from around the world, all eager to learn about the Harvard study that had captured global attention. Maya sat in the front row, no longer the frightened homeless girl who had traced patterns on rain-soaked glass. She wore a simple blue dress that Dr. Kenworth had helped her choose, her hair neatly braided, but her eyes held the same intense intelligence that had first captivated Dr. Martinez. Beside her sat 3 other children, each between the ages of 10 and 14, each discovered through the network Maya had helped establish for finding kids with extraordinary pattern recognition abilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Martinez began, "6 months ago, we thought we understood the limits of human pattern recognition. We believed that exceptional visual intelligence required years of training, formal education, and specific cultural advantages. We were wrong." The presentation that followed documented Maya's cognitive abilities through rigorous scientific testing. Brain scans showed activation patterns unlike anything in existing literature. Her visual cortex operated at levels that seemed to transcend normal human parameters, while simultaneously engaging regions typically associated with intuition and emotional intelligence. But the real breakthrough came when Maya began working with other children who shared similar abilities. Together, they had developed a form of visual communication that encoded complex information in simple drawings. What looked like random sketches to most observers contained layered meanings that could convey mathematical concepts, emotional states, and even predictive information about human behavior. "Maya's abilities aren't unique," Dr. Martinez continued. "They represent a form of intelligence that exists in approximately 1 in every 1,000 children, but goes unrecognized because our educational and social systems aren't designed to identify or nurture these capabilities." The implications were staggering. If Maya's estimates were correct, there were potentially millions of children worldwide whose extraordinary cognitive abilities remained hidden, dismissed as learning disabilities or behavioral problems. These children often ended up in special education programs, juvenile detention centers, or living on the streets, their gifts mistaken for deficits. Maya had specifically requested to address the conference herself, despite Dr. Martinez's concerns about exposing her to such intense scrutiny. When she took the stage, the auditorium fell completely silent. "Most of you are here because you want to understand how my brain works," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "But that's only part of the story. The real, in question, is why it took so long for anyone to notice that brains like mine exist." She walked to a large screen where Dr. Martinez had prepared visual aids for the presentation. Instead of using the prepared materials, Maya began drawing with her finger on the touch-sensitive surface. Simple lines and curves appeared, seemingly random at first, but gradually forming into complex patterns that seemed to shift and move as viewers watched. "This is what I see when I look at all of you," Maya said, continuing to draw. "Patterns of curiosity, skepticism, fear, and excitement. Some of you are genuinely interested in helping kids like me. Others are thinking about how to use our abilities for your own research. and a few of you are planning to prove that we're frauds or anomalies that don't deserve attention. The accuracy of her assessment was evident in the uncomfortable shifting and nervous laughter that rippled through the audience. Maya had done it again, seeing through professional facades to understand the true motivations and concerns of her observers. "But here's what all of you are missing," Maya continued, adding final touches to her drawing. "Kids like me don't want to be studied like lab experiments. We want to be understood as human beings who happen to think differently. We want to use our abilities to solve problems and help people, not to perform tricks for academic conferences." Dr. Martinez watched in amazement as Maya transformed what was supposed to be a scientific presentation into a profound statement about human dignity and potential. The girl was teaching some of the world's leading researchers about the difference between studying intelligence and respecting it. Maya stepped back from the screen, revealing an image that somehow captured the complex dynamics of the entire conference. It showed patterns within patterns, representing the intersection of scientific curiosity, institutional politics, media attention, and human hope. But at the center was a simple truth. Exceptional intelligence comes in many forms, and society's responsibility is to nurture rather than exploit it. "The most important pattern I've learned to see," Maya concluded, "is that everyone in this room has the capacity to recognize and support different kinds of intelligence. The question is whether you'll choose to use that capacity." The applause that followed was unlike anything Dr. Martinez had experienced at an academic conference. It wasn't just professional acknowledgement of interesting research. It was recognition of fundamental truths about human potential and social responsibility. In the months that followed, Harvard's pilot program became a model copied by institutions worldwide. The Maya Grayson Foundation, established with private donations and university support, created identification and support networks for children with exceptional pattern recognition abilities. Educational programs were redesigned to accommodate different learning styles, and assessment methods were developed to recognize forms of intelligence that traditional testing had missed. Maya herself chose not to pursue a conventional academic path. Instead, she became something unique in the educational world, a bridge between different ways of thinking. She worked with researchers to understand cognitive diversity, with educators to develop inclusive teaching methods, and with children to help them recognize and develop their own extraordinary abilities. 3 years after her discovery at Harvard, Maya stood in the same spot where she had first traced patterns on rain-soaked glass. Now it was a clear spring morning, and the building housed the new Center for Cognitive Diversity, established in honor of her contributions to understanding human intelligence. A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, sat where Maya had once sat, drawing complex mathematical equations in the condensation on the window. His mother, a university custodian, waited nearby with the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that had once characterized Maya's situation. Dr. Martinez, now the center's director, approached the boy gently. "Hi there, I'm Dr. Martinez. What's your name?" "Carlos," the boy said shyly, not looking up from his drawings. "Those are beautiful patterns, Carlos. Would you like to come inside and tell me about them?" Carlos looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. As they walked toward the building, Maya appeared from around the corner, her arms full of art, supplies and notebooks. "Carlos," Maya said, kneeling down to meet his eyes, "I used to draw on these windows too. Want to see what we can create together inside?" Carlos's face lit up with the same expression Maya had worn when Dr. Martinez first recognized her abilities. It was the look of a child who had finally found someone who saw patterns the way they did, who understood that different thinking wasn't wrong thinking, just different. As they entered the center together, Maya reflected on how much had changed. Since that rainy night, when a curious professor had noticed a homeless girl tracing impossible patterns on glass. The world still had far to go in recognizing and nurturing all forms of human intelligence. But at least now there were places where children like Carlos would never have to sleep in the cold, wondering if anyone would ever understand the extraordinary things they could see. The patterns Maya had first traced in desperation had become pathways for countless other children to find their place in a world that was finally learning to see intelligence in all its magnificent forms. And in the end, that was the most beautiful pattern of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.